Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hello. Britain once forgot how long an inch is. Okay. Windows update. It's okay. Let's go. Tom Scott. Amazing channel. Let's do it.
Idea, Tom. Film in front of Parliament.
Original link to the video, top of the description. Below that, link to the Discord. Click on it. Love to have you. Let's go.
It'll be imposing. It's relevant. Great idea, Tom. Film in front of Parliament. It'll be imposing. It's relevant to the story. It'll look great. It is covered in scaffolding. When you buy a tape measure, that tape measure had to be checked and calibrated with equipment at the tape measure factory, and that manufacturing equipment had to be calibrated by other calibration equipment at its factory, and that equipment had to be calibrated, and so on and so on and so on and so on, until at some point that chain has to stop. There has to be an organisation whose job it is to say, you don't need to calibrate anymore, here is the truth. These days, that job's done at the National Physical Laboratory in the UK or the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US. I've actually been lucky enough to visit both of those in the past, so I will put links to those videos at the end of this one. The international standard for length is the metre, and is based on unchanging physical constants. A metre is defined as how far light travels in a vacuum in a certain fraction of a second. Is that all in frame? I've got no idea. I can't see my screen. But anyway, ever since the mid-20th century, the international agreement has been that an inch is exactly 25.4 millimetres, which means...
So why do we use yard over here? Like 3 yards or 100 yards, you know?
Yes, that in the US and imperial systems of measurement, inches, feet, yards, miles, they're all based on metric now. But before all those modern standards were set, those systems of measurement were based on prototypes. Not prototypes as in early test versions, but as in physical artifacts, which were, by definition, the length they said they were. The metre was the distance between 2 marks on a platinum iridium bar stored in Paris. If those marks somehow changed, then the definition of the metre changed with them. Before we went metric, Britain had physical standards for the old imperial units too, dating back centuries.
I mean, it's not like if that thing broke, it's not like the world would like delve into chaos, right? It would, you just make another, right? I think.
Somehow changed, then the definition of the metre changed with them. Before we went metric, Britain had physical standards for the old imperial units too, dating back centuries. There are references to various standards all through history, but as far as I could tell, the first prototype that could reasonably be called a British national standard was a brass rod that was created in 1760. That standard was eventually set in law. In 1825, the yard, so 3 feet 36 inches, was defined as being the distance between the marks on that one object stored with the Clerk of the House of Commons in Parliament. 9 years after that law was passed, Parliament burned down. They were trying to burn old records that were on wooden tally sticks, and the fire got out of control. That famous Parliament building that were on wooden tally sticks, and the fire got out of control. That famous Parliament building, the one that's behind the scaffolding, it isn't some ancient castle. Heck, the US Capitol building is older than what's behind there. Only a few parts from medieval times are actually still standing. The rest was built during Queen Victoria's reign after the fire. Anyway, all the standards for imperial units were also destroyed in that fire. The standard yard had been partly melted, which meant Britain didn't have any legal standard of measurement. But that was fine, because the law also had a provision for what to do in that case. You make a new standard yard defined by the length of a pendulum that takes a certain amount of time to swing.
Okay, so it's not as permanent as it sounds, right?
Fine, because the law also had a provision for what to do in that case. You make a new standard yard defined by the length of a pendulum that takes a certain amount of time to swing. Great idea. More than a century early, they were defining the measurements by physical constants.
That's pretty cool, actually. That is cool. Legitimately cool. Like, it's a good time to use that word.
Defined by the length of a pendulum that takes a certain amount of time to swing. Great idea. More than a century early, they were defining the measurements by physical constants. Just one problem, those definitions were wrong, or as the law later...
Wait, but isn't the rate that it's going to spin at going to depend on how fast you push it? I don't know exactly.
Put it, by the researchers of scientific men, doubts were thrown on the accuracy. Those scientific men were the Standards Commission, headed by astronomer and mathematician Sir George Airy. That commission was in charge of re-establishing the lost units, and their final report made it clear the government had put a dodgy experiment into law. It wasn't accurate enough. So instead, the standard was reconstructed based on all the copies and other versions that had been made over all the years. All the objects, not like tape measures or anything like that, but the things that were one step down that chain of calibration. So by 1855, a new physical yard had been constructed, made of bronze, and the law was changed to define the idea of a yard as a distance between two gold studs on that new bar. There were a few other suggestions in the Commission's report. They strongly argued for the decimalisation of units and currency, which wasn't successful for a century, but they also said that there should be a public version of the standards in every large town, not because they'd be perfectly accurate, but because it would make it really, really obvious if a shopkeeper with a dodgy tape measure was trying to cheat you. Those standards still exist in a few places. In London, you can find them in Trafalgar Square, in the Guildhall, and by the gate of the Royal Observatory. So, if you have Square...
Standards of length at 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit? Jeez. So, pound, you guys use pound, you use inch, sometimes you use pounds. Ooh, MDCCCLXXVI. Ooh, what is that? So so 1,000? Oh, God. 10, okay.
In the Guildhall and by the gate of the Royal Observatory. So, if you have bought lunch from, let's say, a certain shop and you want to check if your foot-long sandwich really is a foot long, you can do that. And I did. So, was the new yard the same distance as the old one? Well, it would be difficult to mess it up too much. There are a lot of copies of the original to work from, but every time you make an analogue copy of something, you do lose a little bit of precision. Before the 1834 fire, the yard was the length of one particular block of metal. After 1855, it was the length of another block. In between, well, you could take a pretty accurate guess, but that chain of calibration, that source of truth, was broken. For 21 years, no one knew how long a yard, a foot, or an inch actually was.
Wing it. Interesting video. Should I watch another? Okay, let's do this one. Things that the Luftwaffe bombed by mistake. Okay.
This is the Linby Trail, near the little village of Linby in Nottinghamshire in England. I'm filming on the trail because it'd be really weird to do a walk and talk to a camera on a stick in a little village. This is one of those stories about war where no one dies, no one even gets hurt, and for a little while there's this bit of light in the middle of something terrible. So, World War II, 1941, Britain is being bombed every night by the Luftwaffe. Over in Germany, William Joyce broadcasts fascist propaganda over the radio to the UK, trying to demoralise the British public. The press nickname him Lord Haw Haw because of his affected upper-class accent. Sometimes Lord Haw Haw would forecast which towns and places would be bombed next, and he was eerily accurate. And on one of his broadcasts, he threatened Linby docks. Dockyards were strategic bombing targets, of course they were, but Linby docks aren't dockyards at all.
Interesting. So you kind of is that like a psychological thing? Like you're going to be right. So now who knows if you're going to be right or you're telling the truth or not later, and you can really, it's kind of like saying like, I'll get you back, but like not telling you when. So it's okay.
There are these little streams that run through the village of Linby. The docks are just a local name. But Luftwaffe commanders had looked at the map, seen Linby docks, and decided to waste some of their limited warfighting resources on bombing something that, while quite pretty, was strategically useless. Oh, and they missed. The bombs landed a couple of miles away. No one was even slightly hurt, although presumably one farmer's field had some unexpected and rather violent ploughing done to it. It's a lovely story. It's part of the local mythos here in Linby. You'll find articles about it online, and it's referenced on the lovely little parish map that is next to the bus shelter. And I'm really, really sorry to Linby, but I'm not sure it's true. Because if you look at the maps from back then, they didn't say Linby Docks on them. Of course they didn't. These streams are so small that they are barely even marked on the largest scale maps. If Germany was using maps that were that detailed and that precise, well, then they could tell that the docks weren't big enough to have any ships in them. And if they weren't using maps that detailed, well, then the docks wouldn't be marked on them at all. Lord Haw-Haw, that propaganda broadcaster, he didn't actually give away secret plans or announce bombing raids in advance. Of course he didn't. The Luftwaffe didn't want to give advance warning so they could be shot down. Yep. So he just lied or relied on reports that came back in the news in the hope that he would be right enough to convince the British public, who weren't fools. A lot of folks tuned into him, a few million, but it was mostly for entertainment. There's an argument that rather than hurt morale, he actually helped British solidarity. And there aren't many recordings of him. There's certainly no audio of him saying Linby Docks that I could find. The Blitz was logged in detail by all the local authorities and all the records were compiled. Hucknall, the nearby town, is mentioned twice, but Linby isn't mentioned at all. I searched through all the relevant local newspapers. They've been digitised and they have no articles about any bombings near here. I even asked the local historical society and they were wonderful. They went through a lot of documents for me. But there's nothing from the time that backs it up. Just folklore and stories told from parent to child, from elder to youth for maybe the last 80 years. Which does hurt a little because it's such a wonderful story. Now, if I present something like this to the world and say, I don't know, there's a tendency for certain over-enthusiastic people to see it as a mystery and try to solve it. The only people who know for sure are over 90 years old, and look, no one should bother them trying to disprove or prove one bit of local folklore. Besides, I'm only in my 30s, and I've occasionally had moments where I've recalled clear memories of things that evidence later showed me I've had completely wrong. But the bomb records are not perfect. Newspapers back then might not have mentioned it, because bomb lands in field, no one hurt, is not a story. At least not in 1941, it would be today. Maybe True. It did happen. Or maybe someone came up with a story once, told it as truth, and everyone thought, sure, that sounds fun, let's go with it. I'm expected to provide evidence for claims, rightly so, but there are countless tales that never happened. We call them urban legends, or eventually...
It's almost surprising that a stream this low, like... Well, it's not exactly a very arid climate, you know, so... I don't know, for such a small waterway to kind of stay... Never mind, the more I think about it, the less crazy it is.
There are countless tales that never happened. We call them urban legends, or eventually just legends. Did King Alfred really burn the cakes? Probably not. Does it matter?
What's that from? Why don't I get that?
Over a long enough period of time? No, not really. I don't think something like this needs to be proven or debunked, even if it somehow could be. It's just a good story. Thanks to the historians and archives who helped me with my research. I have put links in the description. This is the Roe River, and if you believe the hype, it is the shortest river in the world. And through the miracle of modern technology...
Oh, come on. No.
The waterproof camera on this stick, I can show you the full length of it, all the way from the source, a crystal clear spring in Giant Springs State Park, Montana, flowing down 61 meters until it joins the much, much, much larger Missouri River flowing to the ocean. Yeah, the river's just there. And it really is crystal clear. While I was setting up, someone came along with some bottles and filled them up for drinking water. I was up in VidCon in Los Angeles last week as I record this, and I was having dinner with a few folks who make educational videos when I mentioned that I was coming here to talk about the shortest river. And if I'm honest, the conversation didn't go well. They kept raising different objections and seemed to get angry just at the concept. So eventually, I looked up the dictionary definition of river in the Oxford English Dictionary: a large natural stream of water flowing in a channel to the sea, a lake, or another usually larger stream.
That's not specific enough.
Of the same kind. First objection: this is man-made. True, the course of this was refined by people, but so is the Los Angeles River, and that's still a river, despite a lot of people thinking it's just an overgrown storm drain. Although, to be fair, the Roe River here didn't even have a name until the 80s, when some students surveyed it and campaigned for it to be named the shortest river. The Guinness Book of Records did eventually agree, at least for a while. Okay, said the folks I was talking to, but how do you know it's the shortest? That is a fair point. There have been long documented arguments about whether this river is even the shortest in the United States. And there are international claims too, like this short channel between two lakes near Jyväskylä in Finland. And I was really skeptical before I got here, but yeah, now I'm standing by it.
That seems like a better claim than the other one.
I genuinely think this is the shortest river in the world.
Yeah, because it actually, like, it doesn't look like it's just that. Yes, it's two separate big bodies of water connected by a little inlet. That gets it. That gets it. That's the shortest.
It is a large natural channel flowing in one direction to a lake. Fits all the dictionary definitions, unless you want to argue that it's not large enough. But frankly, if it's large enough to drown in, I think it should count. You could try adding more specifics. Forget arguing about whether this is natural. How about saying that a river starts at a source, flows somewhere in a consistent direction, and ends at a much bigger bit of water? That seemed like a great definition to me, until someone pointed out that that would include water slides. Every time we tried to nail down a definition,
It took me a second to get what he just said.
it slipped away. I'll be honest, I'm not really tried to nail down a definition. It slipped away.
I want to go for a swim.
I'll be honest, I'm not really here to show you the world's shortest river. Because I can't. Because there will always be quibbles about definitions, all the categories that we try to put the natural world into, to fit everything into maps and databases. All those categories have to be fuzzy. Map makers have known for years that, as with so many things in the real world, is it a river? Is not always a question that can be answered with a binary yes or no. There is almost always an exception to the rule. The river is whatever humans agree it is. The exact definition probably differs between languages and cultures anyway. And in the end, the Guinness Book of Records decided not to have a listing for shortest river.
That's an interesting statement right here.
Exception to the rule. The river is whatever humans agree it is. The exact definition probably differs between languages and...
That's interesting. Like, the exact definition differs between languages. So, what a river is in the English language, that is the shortest.
cultures anyway. And in the end, the Guinness Book of Records decided not to have a listing for shortest river.
It's beautiful. Ooh.
Cape Reinga, at the very northern tip of New Zealand's North Island, is one of the few places in the world where you can watch two oceans collide. So say
What two oceans? It's not the Indian Ocean. It's obviously the Pacific Ocean and something else. And the Southern Ocean? But... oh, it could be the... So New Zealand isn't in the Pacific?
the guidebooks anyway, the truth is a little more complicated. First of all, you can find photos online like this. I took that from a kayak in Svalbard, up in the Arctic. Two very different coloured waters separated by a bit of foam. People online claim that photos like it show one of the few places in the world where two oceans meet but don't mix. But no, that's just where a river is washing fresh water.
I was just about to say that, and I would have sounded really smart if I did. It looks like, you know, the cloudy sediment-filled water of a river mixing with, you know, the... I forget what that's called. This is a certain kind of, like, biome or habitat. There's a name for it. I forget. I was going to say something. Oh yeah, what oceans?
People online claim that photos like it show one of the few places in the world is washing fresh water filled with sediment out into the sea. The truth of where two oceans meet is just not that dramatic.
Oh right, yeah, I was going to say, why is it that an ocean has to be separated where a certain kind of water looks different from another kind of water? That I feel like that has nothing to do with oceans. Oceans are just parts of the water on the earth that we separated on a map. Like, it's not like they're actual different oceans. It's all one big thing of water, and we just call them different things. It's not like there's going to be like an edge, like a boundary.
See the waves from the Tasman Sea coming in from the west and clashing with the Pacific Ocean waves from the east. right? No.
So this is another thing. Like, is the Caribbean Sea, the Caribbean Sea, in the Atlantic Ocean? Is there a single sea that, like, is the Mediterranean Sea part of the Atlantic Ocean? It is, right? It obviously is. There's no. So, does Israel border the Atlantic? Yes, right? Because right? Yes. Right?
Ocean currents and waves have many causes. The weather, water temperature, water salinity, how much salt is in there. And they're three-dimensional. Now, with all the complicated geography and wind,
from a crab's perspective, are fish flying like
here at the very tip of the country, of course it's chaotic down there, it's turbulent. Of course you have different sets of waves meeting, but those are local effects. As soon as you get away from land, the water here will become part of the massive system that's defined by global weather and ocean currents. And those ocean currents are measured in Sverdrup. One Sverdrup is 1 million cubic meters of water moving at a meter per second, and the largest currents measure more than 100 Sverdrup. Those are amounts that make no sense on any human scale. While there are often currents here that might contribute to that particular weird wave pattern, this is just one very, very small bit of the ocean with waves that look messy on a human scale because of the land nearby. And despite what the guidebooks say, this isn't even where the Tasman Sea ends and the Pacific begins. Not according to the maps. The official limits of oceans and seas are defined by the International Hydrographic Organization, and those standards are arbitrary lines designed to make sure that everyone can agree.
I gotta ask Discord, so maybe I'll have an answer after. Guys, are all seas inside of oceans? Is Israel technically touching the Atlantic? Okay, they're answering.
On what's where.
Someone said no.
Weather warnings and marine charts describe the same areas, no matter who's producing them. And those lines are nothing to do with the position of any ocean currents. And according to those standards, the Tasman Sea meets the Pacific at North Cape, a closed nature reserve about 2 kilometers that way. This is just a windy bit of rock with a lighthouse and a road. That doesn't mean you shouldn't come here, though. Cape Reinga is beautiful. It's part of the local mythology.
Equator, Vancouver, and nautical miles.
And it's worth the trip. But when they say it's where two oceans collide, that just isn't quite true.
I did on Google Maps, you can do a measure distance, and like, so you measure distance from a point, and I did it where I live, like Rhode Island, and drag it all the way across the world until the line starts to flip, because you've gone as far as you can without now returning to where you were. So you can basically find if you went straight down, or maybe not, just the furthest point away from me. I'm not sure if going straight down and where you come up would equal the furthest point away from you. I'm not sure if that's true or not because of like the oval shape. But I find that the furthest place away from me on the planet is a little bit off the coast of Perth, Australia. Like 200, like 100 miles west, maybe a little southwest or west of Perth, Australia. It's a fun fact. Okay, very interesting. I gotta pee. And I don't know if I'm gonna separate these into different videos or just put one Tom Scott video up. Awesome channel. I love this guy's channel. Phenomenal. Check it out if you haven't. See you guys next time. Bye.